So this episode is going to be with Brian Worley. He's the owner of Addison's Bookstore downtown. They sell rare and often original editions of many classic books, some unusual books, but there's a lot you can definitely learn at Addison's. So Brian is a PhD in nuclear engineering from MIT. He spent most of his career working in Oak Ridge nuclear engineering. So I get to talk with him as someone who's qualified. I get to talk with him about the recent developments in nuclear fusion. And then we kind of move on to more of the book-centered part of the conversation. And so we get to talk about some of our favorite people of all time. His favorite American being Benjamin Franklin, mine being Teddy Roosevelt's. So we get to bounce our ideas off each other. And then towards the end of the conversation, we more so get into vision behind Addison's and why he decided to open this great bookstore on Gay Street. I posted on my Instagram. I got my favorite purchase of all time from Addison's just a few days ago. I was able to purchase a first edition of Teddy Roosevelt's autobiography, which I've already read, but I was able to get one of the original prints from 1913. And so I'm in the process of getting it framed, and it's kind of become one of my most prized possessions. So sit down, hang out with us, and hope you get to enjoy this conversation about reading, about books. Reading is something that I hate that I neglected for a long part of my life, but in the last 2 or 3 years, I've more so kind of developed a love for reading. I've developed a small little collection, but that being said, this is my episode with Brian Worley, owner of Addison's Bookstore on Gay Street. Thanks. So I'm here with Brian, a family friend of mine. So we'll go ahead and start. And something interesting that I thought, I recently read, Principles by Ray Dalio. And so I watched a lot of his interviews. He's the founder of Bridgewater Associates, like the leading hedge fund in the world. But at the beginning of all his interviews, he says, "Let's play jazz," I guess. And so this book was sitting right next to me. It kind of sparked something in me. I think his dad was a jazz musician, so that's how he always kind of starts things. So, like I say, let's go ahead and play some jazz. But yeah, so I've got some notes ready, but I've gone through your kind of career, and so I notice, you can go ahead and take a call if you want. Okay. So I'll go ahead and get into our jazz session. And I'll go ahead and start with a quote, because I've gone through kind of your career. I looked at your LinkedIn, and I saw you did data analytics more recently, before opening this. And you obviously have a PhD at MIT, did work in Oak Ridge. Now you're here owning Addison's. And so all of that kind of pours into this quote that I was reading Marcus Aurelius yesterday. And he says in Meditations, "To care for all men is according to man's nature, and a man should hold on to the opinion, not of all, but of those only who confessively live according to nature." So I possibly will be working in data analytics sometime soon, but I always find it cool that, in the present day, we have data analytics to kind of systematically live in accordance with nature. So if you wanted to talk about your work doing that in the last couple of years, feel free.
Well, now data analytics has sort of become an enabler for AI, if you will. Mm-hmm. And AI is becoming more and more pervasive, and now there's a lot of debate about philosophically about what the role of AI should be in man's development and man's relationship to everything around him, including nature, and what is the role of man in using AI. So that's sort of where the data analytics, from my perspective, comes in, and where actually books come in too, because books have the ideas of mankind forever. So
Hmm.
it will be very interesting to see how that knowledge accumulated by mankind all the way down back to Marcus Aurelius and earlier will be complementarily used with technology.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely so. So I'll definitely thank for your answer. I'll go ahead and start kind of at the beginning of what I read up on your LinkedIn. So quick question: how does a kid from Found City get into MIT? Because I'm trying to get into into grad school right now, so I definitely need some help. But
Um, so I think one of the things that I really enjoyed growing up
hmm
was reading and math,
hmm
and so reading, ends up in a place like this. Math ends up in just what you're interested in school and what you're proficient at. And I went to UT as an undergraduate in nuclear engineering, and so I applied to MIT in nuclear engineering. I chose nuclear engineering because it required the most math courses at the time,
hmm
and that's how I ended up there.
hmm very cool. Um, I listen to the Lex Friedman podcast a lot. And you may not know him, but he's an MIT researcher. Um, and so I've talked to another guy a few weeks ago who's giving kind of a conference at MIT. And so if you wanted to kind of expound upon your experiences up there, maybe a little
Well,
bit.
I mean, you're surrounded by a lot of uh, intellectual stimulation, not only at MIT, but you got Harvard and Radcliffe and Northeastern and all the schools, other schools around you as well. I think at one time they said about 1/3 of the population at any one time in the Boston areas are students or recently graduated students. So it's a great experience to be exposed to other students, of course, that are really vibrant, but also to these great minds passing through all the institutions up there and having an opportunity to just go and sit and listen to them.
hmm Yeah. Um, and so I saw you studied, I guess it was philosophy and nuclear engineering at MIT.
Well, it's just nuclear engineering.
hmm
Yeah, I got it. And so, but that was mostly in the reactor physics, which is mostly the theoretical part
hmm
of nuclear engineering. So I was more of a physicist than an engineer, but my degree was in engineering, and of course I did get a doctorate in it. Yeah.
hmm So where does the philosophy, I guess, come from? Where did I read that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, PhD is it's a philosophy degree,
Oh, okay.
and
Very true.
so that goes back
Misread that.
on forever. But actually, in MIT, you have a choice between getting an SCD, which is science doctorate, or a PhD. But most people get PhDs because it's more recognized,
hmm
as a doctorate degree.
Even know that.
Yeah.
Look at me. Um, but yeah, so we'll move on to, I guess, kind of your work in nuclear engineering and your work in Oak Ridge. And I've got another quote, and this is from Echoes by Pink Floyd, which is where I get the title of my show. And so yeah, they say, and no one showed us to the land, and no one knows the wares are wise. Something stirs and something tries, and starts to climb towards the light. Um, and so, to me, the advances in, you know, nuclear power over the last 100 years or so, is just kind of that slow climb towards the light, towards um, what greater purpose we have here, because at the end of the day, I think energy is essentially what separates rich from poor around the world.
Yeah.
And so if you could kind of maybe get into your career, and what what your contribution has been to nuclear
Well,
engineering.
yeah. So when I finished at MIT, it was 1977, and it was right in the middle of the gas shortages at the time. And I remember having to get up at 4 and 5 in the morning when I was in Boston, driving my car and getting in a line that was going to last for about an hour to get to a gas station, at a gas station to get gas, and then moving back down here. The big sort of discussions at that time was the role of nuclear energy and replacing a lot of the gas usage that was going to be required, either by coal gasification, heating the coal to the point where it could be liquid, or just process heat, where you just use a nuclear reactor to heat the water to provide hot heating to residential areas and other areas. So there was a lot of discussion then about the role of nuclear energy for a lot of purposes. Nuclear energy has sort of been sort of a checkered career, a checkered industry, in the sense that coming out of World War II, there was the big push for peaceful use through generation of electricity. It was recognized even back then that it would be a very clean energy producer. Of course, the worries about safety have persisted all that during that time, sort of accumulating in Chernobyl and then Fukushima. And now I think there's more recognition of the role it could play in providing clean energy and for a long time, and replacing fossil fuels. And I think there's more recognition too that it can be done safely, particularly with the new generation of inherently safe small reactors. So we'll see where it goes. I think now that it's got more political acceptance than it did ever. So we'll see.
Yeah. So we'll kind of get into that some. So I know the U.S. has only had, I guess, one great nuclear accident in 3 Mile Island. But, as the country and the world at large kind of ponders the possibilities of renewable energy, of clean energy, we have to kind of weigh the risk-reward ratio. And I was just interviewing my third cousin, Jerry, who works in the conservation of freshwater mussels. And so we have issues here with TVA that clearly degrade the environment as far as the mussels go, and that travels upstream, and then the fish that use these mussels to kind of filter the rivers, they start to suffer. But both me and him still came to the same conclusion that when you weigh the risk-reward ratio, we would still prefer to have our lights on.
Yeah, I mean that's always the benefit risk ratio is constantly being revisited. We had the snail darter when we were going to build the dams and along the Little T, and then we had the coal ash accident from the use of coal for production. So there, right there is some consequences of using other energy sources, dams in one case, and in coal in the other. And so I think, what I've noticed through the years is that people are much more accepting of a risk that they feel they have a little control over. Like you get in your car, and which is one of the riskiest things you can do, and you feel comfortable about it because the benefit risk ratio is very acceptable to you. A little less when you get in an airplane because you're not driving the airplane, and then maybe even less if you think a nuclear reactor or a coal plant is going to live next door to you. You don't control the risk, even though the risk may be orders of magnitude lower than what you accept every day in a car. So there's a little bit comes into play about your control of that risk. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that kind of gets rid of one of my questions. I never really thought about the locus of control when it comes to energy like that, because as a layman, somebody who has no experience in energy and electricity, I've kind of come to the conclusion of, why haven't we begun building nuclear plants everywhere? Because to me, when I kind of do the quick math of risk ratio reward of risk reward ratio, when I kind of do the quick math between nuclear, solar, hydro, fossil fuels, it's kind of clear to me that there's definitely by far the greatest reward with nuclear energy. And so you said there were, I guess, political aspects of nuclear energy. And so if you could kind of explain why we aren't shooting up nuclear plants everywhere.
Well, so, there was a lot of opposition to nuclear plants from the environmental community. And I consider myself a conservationist and an environmentalist. And yet I was very supportive of the nuclear industry as a relatively safe and environmentally acceptable solution. I think what has happened over the years is that there was an effort to make them so costly by stringing out the amount of time it took from the time they got a permit to the time they could build, because they were borrowing hundreds of millions of dollars and paying interest on it. And when the production of the plant, or the building of the plant, moves from 7 years to 27 years, like it did in here at Watts Bar was maybe 20 years, then it runs up that interest cost, and it becomes actually not a very cost acceptable alternative. And so that was happening. Of course, everybody was concerned about the nuclear waste and the storage of nuclear waste, and I could go into that a long time. But I think now that I think everybody realizes, I think every reasonable person would say, let's get all the other options on the table that we can: solar, wind, hydro. We want every option there, and then the ones that are technologically ready and economically ready will, be the ones that are used at that time. And I think that's the argument now that most people would have on both sides of the aisle, that said, look, we're not against any particular type of energy. We want to do it in a way that's responsible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you may be the most qualified person that I've met to talk about this, but I know there's been some recent advancements when it comes to nuclear fusion, and so I know that it's a long way out before the public really gets to enjoy the spoils of the great scientists in this country. But could you kind of explain?
Yeah, so I can
advancements?
be glad to do that one. So when I was in graduate school, from 73 to 77, MIT had a big play in fusion energy as well,
Mm-hmm.
and of course fission, which I was in, and the observation by all of us students and the professors even at the time was, fusion energy is going to be the solution, and it's only 50 years away.
Mm-hmm.
And today, if you ask the same thing, I think that's people would say, yes, it's the ultimate solution, and it's only 50 years away. So it was a joke in the industry that it was always 50 years away. And this recent sort of accomplishment by Lawrence Livermore Lab is probably one of those very early victories that everybody can see that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. There's a big ITER project that's co-funded by many countries, being built in France. So I think, the reason that people look forward to a day when we do have fusion energy is that it just requires, abundant materials that we have, seawater and other materials, other than a resource like uranium and thorium that will eventually, over time, over the course of humankind, will be depleted as well. So.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, very, very cool. I'm very excited for the future when it comes to nuclear energy. Hopefully, you and I will both be around to see it. Because I know it's going to take a long time, and I'm not all that clued in, but we shall see. But I'll go ahead and skip around, kind of jump to the present day. So, what was your inspiration behind Addison's, and at what point in your life did you come to the conclusion that I want a bookstore?
Yeah. So I've always been fascinated by, of course, I've enjoyed reading, but I've been fascinated by books and book collecting a little bit. I did some when I was young, in my teens. Actually, I lived in Fountain City, took 2 buses to get downtown at the time. Took 1 bus, but a long walk to get downtown to the Gateway Bookstore, which was at the other end of Gay Street. So to me, it's sort of a closing of a loop from my childhood to open a bookstore on Gay Street when I used to travel across town to get to a bookstore on Gay Street. But back to your original question of why I wanted to own a bookstore, I thought about that since I was a young child, and didn't have the resources, and really didn't even think about it in real terms until I had got to the end of my 2 careers, and thought, okay, now it's a good time to do it. Have some resources to do it with. So, and I wanted to do something that was a little bit different with respect to what's going on in the book market in Knoxville. So that's why I've sort of concentrated on the old and rare books and other interesting used books. Also, wanted to make sure that I could have a space where people could enjoy coming in almost in a library setting and look at the books and sit down and read them, and host events here where people say, hey, it'd be interesting to host an event in a bookstore. So all that to say is I sort of waited my whole life to get to a bookstore.
Mm-hmm.
Here I am.
Yeah, very cool. I grew up in sports, but I guess in the last 2 to 3 years I've begun reading more, and I kick myself every day that I didn't start reading when I was younger. And so I'm constantly, I guess, enthralled by the things I read. I've been reading a lot of the old Stoic philosophers, and just started reading Epictetus. So it's there's a world of imagination in books, and so I guess if you could maybe explain a little bit, if you had like a handful of your most influential authors, who would those be?
Yeah. Well, so there's there's all the classic books that everybody thinks about when they think about great books, and then there's books that inspire you that you just like, and maybe not have the notoriety that other books have. Personally, I've always been interested in historical fiction, so I like to read Thomas B. Costain when I was young, Kenneth Roberts when I was older. There's a lot of good authors in historical fiction. Wolf Hall, by the author that just passed away this year. And then I've always enjoyed. I guess my thought when I read a book is in terms of how meaningful it's going to be to me. Do I enjoy reading it while I'm reading it? Do I turn the page and enjoy it? It's a good story. Second is it well written? And third, will I remember it 5 or 10 years down the road. And so in that sense, books that have a real meaning for me are something like West with the Night by Beryl Markham, who is a contemporary of Isaac Dennison,
Mm-hmm.
and just other books that recently, The Gentleman in Moscow is a book I really enjoyed. So I think for people, the enjoyment of reading it varies all over the map, and as long as you're putting yourself in a different world for a little while and getting inspired or escaping, I think that's what matters.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, you've definitely got a bunch of cool finds. I definitely spent most of my time over here in the biography section, and like I told you, I'm serving tables right now, but I definitely was eyeing up the what was it? The biography of Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah.
So when I save up enough money, I'll come and buy that. But yeah, I don't necessarily gravitate towards biography, but I gravitate towards learning about great men and their philosophy and trying to kind of echo that back onto myself. So are there any, I guess, people in this life that you kind of try to embody, like any historical figures?
I've always been a big fan of Benjamin Franklin,
Mm-hmm.
George Washington, Albert Einstein, Thomas Jefferson, some of the scientists like Pascal
Mm-hmm.
and others. Stephen Hawking, I've enjoyed his books. So I like to read biographies as well, and I think the same reason you just mentioned it does kind of give you an insight to what makes a person's life successful. And also, I've always enjoyed to read the biographies because they are reflective of what was happening during that time period. And for example, Undaunted Courage by the Travels of Lewis and Clark gave a perspective of what was happening at that period. And I recall in that book reading, I think in the introduction or something, saying, well, Thomas Jefferson never traveled on anything faster than a horse.
Mm-hmm.
And you just don't think about those things when you think about things in general. So I think they tell you a little bit about what life was like during that time period.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, even back in that time, we say horse, but weren't they really kind of ponies? Weren't they small little horses back then?
I don't know. I mean, I assume, I assume. And I just learned from a friend of mine that one thing that the Comanches were really famous for was their ability to ride horses. And that's what made them such a strong nation. And they're, when you see pictures of somebody leaning over on the side of the horse with a shooting in there, those were Comanches apparently. And so now I have another book I need to read.
Yeah, that touches on something that I've kind of learned. I think it was essentially the invention of the revolver, and the creation of the Texas Rangers that essentially allowed us to journey west, because the Comanches weren't they just taking out all of our men?
Yeah.
And so once we finally had, 6 shots, we could finally venture further west.
Yeah, I didn't know that. And so that's the kind of thing you learn. And actually, ironically enough, we have a whole section downstairs on early firearms, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's some one of the books we have mentioned that. So it'd be interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And you were talking about you read about great men, and you can kind of learn what makes them tick and what kind of fosters their success. And it made me think of Teddy Roosevelt and Epictetus, I guess, the universality of not taking no for an answer, because Epictetus became one of the great influences of Marcus Aurelius and one of the great influences of just Western philosophy as a whole. And he actually started his life, his first 30 years. He was a slave, and he was actually tortured by his master. And so I think he was having his leg twisted, and he was telling his master, he's like, if you keep twisting, my leg will break. If you keep twisting, my leg will break. And finally his leg snaps, and he eventually says, now what did I tell you? And and the same thing kind of happened with Teddy. Teddy was born, asthmatic, and was essentially told he wasn't going to live past his adolescence. His lungs were too small for his body, and so he was essentially like, well, I'm not going to live in a bed.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go climb the Matterhorn, and I'm going to go live out in the West and hunt buffalo and do all these crazy things that he did. And so that's one thing I'm really grateful for in books, is that I've been able to kind of channel this universal philosophy and apply it to my life. Whenever I have something mildly, mildly disruptive happen in my life, I kind of get to think of, Epictetus had his legs broken and then went on to create his own school of philosophy. And Teddy Roosevelt was told he wasn't going to live past the age of 14 and became, in my opinion, the greatest president we've ever had.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, Teddy Roosevelt is just totally inspirational. And even though he spent so much time outdoors and such in physical activities, at the same time, he wrote all those books.
mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you've been to Sagamore on
I'm going this summer.
Yeah, I've been, and it's really inspirational.
Mm-hmm.
He buried his horse in the backyard, so he's very interesting. And Marcus Aurelius, like you said, I think if I recall, he was considered the first great Stoic, and started Stoicism. And so, that's what's beautiful about reading. And I felt that way about Benjamin Franklin,
mm-hmm.
just what a marvelous mind he had.
Mm-hmm. If you could I know very little about Benjamin Franklin. I know of his works in science, and I know of his work as a diplomat roughly, but if you have any cool tidbits or anecdotes of what you find cool about Benjamin Franklin, feel free to share them.
So, he did things like that, a lot of people don't actually may or may not know. One of the things that caught my attention early on was he had a chessboard, and he showed how you could cover every square of the chessboard with a knight without repeating, and that if you numbered those jumps, you could build 3x3 squares, or maybe it was 4x4 squares that added up to the same number horizontally and vertically for each of the 4 sub-squares of the 64x64 chessboard, and then the whole chessboard itself. So, the fact that he figured that out, I thought was pretty cool. He also, when he went across the ocean, he looked at the fish and followed the fish and was able to make some observations about, the currents and that. And then lastly, I didn't know this until a few years ago, he had this, I forgot what the name of it. It's a piano that's where you play, you're rotating water in a glass, and then you're hitting the glass, and so they have different harmonics.
Mm-hmm.
And it was actually some great musicians. I don't know if it was Mozart or somebody, probably not. But anyway, wrote pieces for that. Mm-hmm. And they have one that in London. The house he lived in London is now you can go and see it, and they have one in there. So yeah, he just all these amazing bifocals and
mm-hmm.
the postage system, the fire station. I mean, it just goes on and on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, I find it interesting because you've kind of got some Benjamin Franklin in you, in that I think a lot of the great men that I respect have lived multiple lives, so
Yeah,
to speak.
yeah,
They get good at one thing, and they're like, "All right, enough of this. Let's
yeah.
go." As in Teddy Roosevelt's case, let's go hunt buffalo, or let's go reform the New York police department, or let's go rebuild the Navy. So, could you maybe touch on, why you weren't uh, so content to just sit still in your career? Why you've kind of bounced around a
Um,
little bit?
well, yeah, you could argue otherwise in the sense that I was at
Hmm.
Oak Ridge National Lab for 36 years. However, within a lab system like that, you can have multiple careers within that same um, laboratory. So, from my case, I went from nuclear engineering to computational science to data analytics
Hmm.
over that course, and so that was a little bit different. And then, just I guess for myself, I felt like I had been sort of, in some ways, sheltered in research for my whole career. So right at the time when I was retiring from that, I thought, well, I'd like to see what a real commercial enterprise felt like. So I started a company in data analytics. And then after that, I thought, well, I want to do something that's fun. And to me, this is fun, although it's still very different. It's
Hmm.
a retail business. I've never done that before. Um, I feel like I'm retired, and this is my golf game, if you will.
Hmm.
That's how I describe it to my friends. This is something I really enjoy and want to be doing. Is I'll be here as much as I can.
Hmm. Yeah, it's cool. Like I spent the last month or so really diligently reading Ray Dalio's Principles, and so you've kind of been living the same loop diagram that he describes in his life, and something that I'm trying to do. Um, of where you start out with audacious goals, you fail, you learn more about yourself, and you create more audacious goals, and it's just a constant spiral up until you get to your point, and then you're just like, you know what, let's relax and have fun.
Yeah,
Um, so I'm trying to do that. This is kind of my audacious goal because I don't have much experience in marketing, and I realize that's kind of my issue with this. Is like I'm this will be my fifth episode, but I'm proud of the first four episodes.
yeah.
I've already made some growth, and so I'm happy with the work I've done, but I've got to, create more audacious goals of getting this thing out there, because you know what good is this going to be if I just share it between a
Well,
few friends?
you've already done the most important part, and that is get off the dime, so to speak, and
Hmm.
start. And you don't know what's going to happen to you. And that my philosophy is life is a process. You can't plan from A to B to C to D. You can plan it, but it may or may not happen. Probably won't happen. And just enjoying the process and enjoying the stochastic aspect of the process. It's not what you think it's going to be. It's something different, but it's still great.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, and that kind of touches on my greatest influence in this podcast, and my greatest influence in life, which is my grandfather, who I guess passed away almost 3 years ago to the month. Um, and so he lived his life like that. He obviously had goals, but he was rerouted a few different times and still got to the point where at the end of his life he was able to look back and really be proud. He had a building materials business out in Oak Ridge when he was in his 20s, and that went under. And so he started as a janitor in the Old Baptist Hospital, and in 20 years was the vice president. And then he bought a cattle farm from a family friend, became one of the best cattle breeders in the state of Tennessee. It's kind of like, he probably never woke up at any point during his 20s thinking, you know what, I want to be vice president of a hospital. Um, but he got up every day and he went forward. And so I was I'm always kind of kicking myself because I wasted a lot of my late teens and early 20s living the quintessential college life of going out and partying with friends. But when he died, everything kind of changed for me. And it's weird because I obviously miss him, but I've gained so much more from his death than when he was alive, in a sense. I remember the moment he died, I had a message come over me and was like, you need to love more and work harder. And I've been reading Marcus Aurelius, and he essentially says, if you get up and you find a way to love what you're working on, and just fall in love with the process, then there's nothing in this world that anybody can take from you.
Yeah. And that's very wise. And what was it, 2,000 years ago too? So it's pretty amazing that mankind has had the capability to think like that, going back almost, forever. So.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So we'll kind of, I guess, move into the last portion of this, and I would just, like to give you a chance to kind of show off Addison's. And so I was shown the copy of the Iliad and the Odyssey.
Oh yeah,
or the Iliad and the Odyssey.
Yeah.
Was it from 1572?
1572. It was
Yeah.
Homer's Iliad. Yeah.
That's so crazy. And it's it's Greek and Latin, like a translation.
Greek. So the left side is ancient Greek, and the right side is when they translated it into Latin in 1500s. Yeah.
So I don't know exactly when the printing press was.
1423, 26, something like that. Yeah. About a little over 100 years earlier. Yeah.
That was kind of like the first generation of books, so to
Yeah.
speak. They didn't really exist much before that.
Right.
But yeah, are there any other cool, what are your prized possessions in the store, I guess?
Well, I mean, there's there's some very interesting books. They come and go. The thing I didn't really think about a whole lot when I went to the store was I was going to get attached to these books, and then they sold, and I didn't have them to talk about anymore. But we right now we have a first edition of Uncle Tom's Cabin, for example, which is very interesting. Some first edition Hemingways. I guess one of our more interesting books to me right now, besides that the one you mentioned, is we have a 1817 cookbook, and it's considered to be one of the earliest complete A to Z discussions about cooking, and it doesn't have recipes and ingredients per se. It says, here's how you cook, whatever it is. It gives you just a long list of paragraphs about how to store it and cook it, and I think that's very interesting.
Yeah, we would all probably be looking a lot better if we stuck to those principles. There's been kind of like a internet fad or whatever it is that talks about the destructive nature of seed oils, which I think were introduced back in the early 1900s. And so we used to cook and fry a lot of our things in tallow and in different forms of animal fat. And so I would be interested to kind of read some of those, those recipes to see.
You want to take a tub of lard, and you want to start with that,
Yeah.
And actually, it is interesting to read. And even cookbooks that are not that old, but are like 1950s, 1940s. We have one downstairs that I think is pretty interesting. It was by Ford Motor Company, or some it's sort of a promotional thing, but it had little pictures of inns and hotels across the United States and the favorite recipe from them. So it's almost like a little travelogue of the 1950s to go through it, flip through it, and see it. And there's 7 or 8 mentioned for Tennessee, and every state has some. So that's kind of fun.
But yeah, so we'll go ahead and wrap this up, and I'll let you kind of speak to the public on why they should come and spend an afternoon in Addison's.
Well, yeah, thank you. Well, I'm going to be speaking from my passion about old books because I think opening up an old book or just going down the aisle and pulling out an old book, what are you going to find? Well, you're going to find, for example, some inscription in the front, that's very interesting. Maybe the handwriting is exquisite sometimes. Some of our old books that were published during the Civil War have inscriptions by mothers or fathers to their sons who are all fighting either one side or the other, and they're sitting there, for us to see and read. The other thing I really like about old books is just the illustrations are just amazing. I mean, almost most of the really old books that we have here have beautiful illustrations in them, are just really unique illustrations, and so I think that's and then the covers and the bindings are beautiful in many cases, or the subject's just interesting. Now we have, if you want, in our travel section, we have a book written in the late 1800s on what to see in France. Well, it's really interesting to see what they said you should see in France in 1800s versus today, and those kind of sort of curiosities. Downstairs, we have a lot of eclectic books. It's not going to be able to go and find them very easily, and classics, literature. So I think it's an exploratory event to come in and just spend time to look around, see what you have. We do keep a inventory of all the books we have up on the main floor when you walk in, and then downstairs whatever. Yeah.
But yeah, we can go ahead and wrap up. I really appreciate talking with you. This is my favorite episode to date. I feel like they get better and better and better. So
I'm sure they will.
We'll have another episode at some point because there's a wealth of knowledge in here that we could talk about. So either way, it was good talking with you. Thank you, Brian.